Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's another edition of Webinar Fridays. This one today, well, in case there are new folks on the call, welcome. These things are meant to be loose, rambling conversations where we can go just about anywhere, especially today with the subject is anything goes. So really, just listen or jump in, ask questions. I'll cut to Sonia in a second to talk about that. But this is meant to be a safe place where we can think and feel just about anything within moral and legal bounds. And don't be shy or do be shy. Whatever's working for you. Just listen is fine, or participate is great too. Today we're just going to try to sort of a lot of the subjects we usually present, it's an hour and we're trying to kind of get to some basics, and it can clip off some of the more idiosyncratic moments or issues that are hard to discuss or don't quite fit in flow or something like that. So today we're just gonna kind of cruise through some random thoughts, and so please add your own to the mix too. But let's cut over to Sonia for some descriptions.
Okay. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Just wanted to go over the two ways that you can interact and ask questions. So BJ will go through some slides and bring up some topics. And then after that, we'd love to hear from you. And you can do this in two ways. You can click on the raised hand button up at the top, and we will unmute you, and you can ask your question out loud. Or if you prefer to be anonymous or not say anything out loud, you can type your question into the question area and I will read it out and BJ can answer it. So again, raise your hand, ask it out loud, or type it into the bottom and we can read it for you. Again, if you would like to remain anonymous, please just let us know. That's no problem. If we are not able to get through all of the questions during this hour, we will record a second session to get the dose. So if we're not able to get to your question, please know that we will do it following this. Thanks again for being here.
Yes, righto. And also, guys, if anyone has responses to questions that were asked, this is really meant to be a conversation, not me holding court. So feel free to respond and ask each other stuff too. Okay, with that, let's just jump in. So one issue that is a big one that we haven't found a place to talk about per se yet is organ donation. So I don't know, for me, kind of an amazing, stunning piece of science and potentially an amazing way to conceive of a legacy and to participate in the world is to donate one's organs. So I think we've all been probably, it's a strange system we have in the US that's funneled through the DMV. Generally in most states is where you register to be whether or not you want to be an organ donor. So there's an interesting organization called Organize. I have to look those guys up. I'm not sure what they've been up to lately, but there's been some efforts in the recent years to both get the word out, because so many people, it's gonna sound weird, but a lot of people die in unexpected fashions, and their organs that would otherwise be viable in another human's body are lost. And it's a very precious moment, and it has to be organized in advance. We'll talk about the details in a second, but it is an underutilized, I think, act of generosity. And solid organs like kidneys, heart, lung, liver, all can be transplanted. Skin to some degree to corneas, and maybe other things that I'm not thinking of right now. The science is stunning. It's come a long way. People can live for many, many years with a transplanted organ. And there are people, the wait list for folks to receive an organ is very long, and a lot of people die on that list. So this just seems like another moment with good communication and structures and systems in place, we could link up these organs who have lost their home to find a new home. So I would really encourage you guys to register to be an organ donor if it feels right for you. A couple details. One is, if you're an organ donor, if it's on your license, and say you're in an accident, paramedics come, nothing by law, by bioethics, they're still going to try to do everything they can to resuscitate you, to help you to live. Just because you're an organ donor, what should not, will not affect the kind of care you receive. So do know that some folks have to in mind that if they're an organ donor, then they worry that the paramedics won't try to save their lives. Not at all true. Don't worry about that. Another sort of detail here is a lot of us have enthusiastically signed up to be organ donors, but don't realize what has to happen for it to work. So an organ, if I die, my organs will die with me really quickly. You generally, to successfully transplant an organ, the actual moment of death generally has to be in a hospital. There has to be gear and people ready to harvest the organ at the last breath. So if you're out in the world, in the field, and if you die, you're not going to be able to, your organs are not going to be able to find a home. The exceptions, a couple exceptions. One are corneas can be transplanted from someone who's already passed. And the other is what's called a willed body program. These are not state-specific, but rather institution-specific programs. So like UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, where I've worked, they have a willed body program. And most hospital medical centers, especially research-based, or if they have a pathology department in their institution, will have something like a willed body program. This is brokered between you and that program. So again, not a state registry, et cetera. So if it's of interest to you, donating your body to science for one reason or another, it can feel really good for teaching purposes, to know that your body is going on to other things. So that's a beautiful way to go. And you don't have to have been freshly deceased for your body to be donated to a willed body program. In the freshman year of medical school, we moved through a cadaver, spent a whole year with a cadaver, and we had this beautiful ceremony thanking this person for their gift. This is lovely. So anyway, that would be a phone call between you or your family member and the institution. So if you're like UCSF, you look up their pathology department, give them a call and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about your willed body program. It's pretty much that easy. Okay, so that's some basics of organ donation. Of course, more to say on all these. We'll keep on humping here. So a lot of times I hear myself talking as though, around the importance of communication and talking things out, and a lot of my comments presuppose that the patient or that the person in question is communicable, that they can communicate, that they're awake, that they're alert. Very often, and certainly in terminal illness and advanced illness, very often a person is not able to communicate. Either they're completely out, asleep, comatose, or they're delirious and not able to kind of string together thoughts in a way that you can follow, or in a way that makes sense even to them. So a lot of times, or people are just altered by pain or depression or fatigue of disease. And so maybe on some level, technically communication is possible, but the person's just shut down. So one way and another, it's very common that you as a caregiver might find yourself trying to care for someone who can't talk to you, can't tell you how they're feeling, etc. So just a few thoughts here. One is, you've probably heard this, that the idea of that hearing is the last thing to go. That's probably true. If we're in the dying process or heading that way, you can feel a body begin to sort of shut down, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly, but sort of organ by organ. And in general, especially in the nervous system, we shut down from the periphery centrally. And so the oldest structures of the brain are deep inside the brain, and then the last to go, that's where a lot of the reflexes are, and ancient structures of the brain. So in a way, the most durable. So hearing is one of those. So this is why we sort of hypothesize that a person can always hear you, even when they don't look like they can. And frankly, I don't even know if that's totally true scientifically or physiologically in every person. Of course, it's not true, but it's a great assumption for us as the caregiver, as a person at the bedside. It's an important thing to presume, both out of respect, but also for your sake. This person is still here on some level. So I would always coach people to communicate, even the person who can't respond, talk to them, share your thoughts and feelings. And also, I don't think you need to tiptoe around the person. A lot of families will think it's unkind to say certain truths in front of the patient. Well, I've always felt like the patient knows better than we do on some level what's going on. And the more respectful thing to do is actually to speak frankly, respectfully, but frankly in front of the person. but really do what feels right for you. You're in a position to know this person best and the situation best. So don't feel like you have to talk to this person, but I would encourage you to. And to just let daily life, talk about the weather with people at the bedside is fine too. I mean, a person in the bed is more likely to feel good about the fact that you're okay, that life is going on some level, and that you're there. So that's one point of advice. Another is if the person is tangentially, like and they're delirious, disoriented, well, delirium can be treated very often. Sometimes it means with stopping a certain medicine that's causing it, or changing the room, making sure there's light, and the person has some contact with sort of daily sort of light cycles, night and day. Make sure the person's sleeping. So there's a lot you can do to kind of push back on delirium, to treat delirium. So it may be an excuse to reach out to the hospice nurse or whoever's at the bedside, whatever clinician's at the bedside, to discuss whether this person may be delirious and can that be treated. So that may be something to do. But also I want to note, if you're talking to a person in the bed who's not able to tell you how they're doing, it's like we're saying, generally a good idea to talk to them. But sometimes silence is exactly what's needed. And the way to read, it is possible to read a body on some level. Especially if we're kind of shut down, we're apt to become more just our reflexes. And a body won't hide discomfort on some level. A body will find a way to convey it, even if not verbally. So if you see a person in the bed who is breathing heavily, quickly, or like labored, the neck muscles popping out, well, that's probably some sign of distress. And if they're doing that only when you're talking to them, then probably better to quiet down. So if you're seeing signs of agitation when you or anybody else is talking, well, then that person needs silence. But it also they just may need the nurse, maybe have trouble breathing. So faster labored breath, fidgetiness, like we're moving around in the bed, and when you stop talking, if they're calm, but they start talking, they start fidgeting again, well, then maybe it's best idea to keep things quiet. Furrowed brow, grimace, usually is also telling you that there's some amount of discomfort. Again, you can stop and start noise around them to see if it's a response to ambient stuff going on, and then they may need quiet. But it also just may mean that they're uncomfortable and need medication or something else. So these are ways, and so then the fourth way to read a body, so faster labored breathing, fidgetiness, furrowed brow, that's sustained, not just for a moment here or there, sustained furrowed brow. And then the fourth thing I'd put on the list is just your own gut sense, especially if you know this person well. You might just have a sense that something's off, or that they may need to hear something, or they may need silence, or they may love some music. I mean, in other words, use your own intuition, your gut sense. We humans are connected in all sorts of ways that we can't see. So trust your sense of connection and work with it. Okay, I think I should probably move on. There's a lot to say on all of these. Being alone, another thing, when I hear myself talking, I often hear myself kind of presupposing that we all have people around. Sometimes it's like too many people. We got to manage all the people around. But it's really increasingly and incredibly true how alone many of us are. Some by choice and plenty of us not. So we're always talking about caregivers, but some people don't have caregivers. So first of all, just to note this reality, it's not one or two of us, it's many of us. And then of course there's sort of emotional isolation, even if there are people around. And maybe not people we trust, or maybe the people around are so bereft and so out of sorts themselves that they're really not present for us as the patient. Or maybe the people around, you don't like them, whatever it is, or this happens commonly with patients, especially in the past, when you would be isolated from the truth, people not talking to you about your own illness. That can be incredibly isolating, like alone in a crowd, and alone with the truth that no one is sharing. It's a kind of gaslighting that can happen. It can be pretty brutal. The Death of Ivan Illich is an old book that I'd point you to that kind of describes this. There's a tradition in a lot of cultures to keep information from the patient, and sometimes that's a wonderful thing, and sometimes that can be a very painful thing. Anyway, so one way or another, many of us are alone. What to do about that? Well, depends. If you want to be alone, then maybe you're just fine. But I would say, especially in the throes of illness, most of us, all of us really need some help. So if you don't have personal friends around or that you want around, it may be all the more incumbent on you to elect hospice sooner than later, in the sense to get professional support around you, or hire aides. You know, some of us have it. On some level, having been on the bed for a long time and taken a lot from others, I sometimes wonder if I'd almost rather, if I, when my next time in the bed, if I'd almost rather pay people to be with me. Well, that's another story. I mean, it can feel like I just have taken so much from people. I just can't imagine asking more. But that's maybe my own neurosis. But one way or another, if you're alone and if you need help, you might consider actually seeking professional help, home health aides, hospice if you qualify. Most of us wait way too long to get hospice involved. So when in doubt, call them. Sooner the better. If you don't qualify, at least you've made contact and you know when to call, whom to call and when. But hospice is probably the closest thing any of us can do in the medical system to hiring a family. I mean, you get interdisciplinary support around you. So anyway, these are just some thoughts about being alone. But also, I also want to shout out, a lot of us don't feel alone just because other people aren't around. A lot of us are connected to animals or to trees or through photographs or through art. I mean, I think that the therapeutic, the salve here is feeling connected. And that doesn't necessarily need to be to other people. So I don't want to pathologize any of us who are alone, who actually like it that way. Solace is a powerful thing. But when we don't like it that way, we need to actually look for connections and create them and build them. And that sometimes means asking people for help. Very hard thing to do. Maybe we can discuss how to do that in the conversation part. All right. Caring for someone you don't like. This came up in our last caregiver webinar. I think it was my mom who asked the question, actually, about this. It's not uncommon, actually. I mean, again, my comments are usually to presuppose that the caregiver loves this person in bed and just is sad at the idea that they're going to leave the planet or are sick. But that's not, that is really not always true. And very often we may have mixed feelings about people around us. So one way or another, whether it's in a marriage, I mean, sometimes we'll be in a relationship that maybe we should have gotten out sooner, but we're still in it, and then the person gets sick. And then what do? Do you leave a person who's in the throes of illness? It'd be very, very difficult. I'm not going to pretend to give generic advice here. But one thing to just throw out here in our conversation, guys, is it may make sense if you're a caregiver and you're somehow roped into caring for someone whom you don't respect or care for. You know, it's really worth asking, do you owe yourself or them to anything to be there? You know, if duty is really calling you and if that's the winning voice, I mean, go for it. Yeah, roll with it, work with it best you can. But there's something really brilliant about a deep honesty that illness can summon. And if the deep honesty is, look, this relationship is broken, I can't honestly summon the love here, then it maybe makes sense to step out. I mean, it's not impossible to counsel couples who are at each other, who don't care for each other anymore, to actually split up, even in the throes of illness. That may be the right thing for some people, or to separate, or to find extra space, or for a spouse or a caregiver to say, I can't do this, but I'll help find someone who can. So again, I can't give you a rote answer to what to do in these situations, but here, the spirit here is mostly to call it out. It is not uncommon. And again, I would keep falling back on this idea of rigorous honesty and big truth. So if that truth includes you not caring for the person, either deal with it in your own way somehow, or explicitly with the person. This is not a time for repressing things. It may be time for making strategic decisions about what gets your grease and where you assert yourself. But that's different from shutting down parts of yourself. I do not advise that, especially in this realm. Okay, we'll keep going. This is very common, that especially at the end of a long run of caregiving is hard for everybody. Being a patient's hard, can be incredibly beautiful too. It's usually a mixture. lots of feelings. But I've met a lot of family members over the years who, if they're being honest with themselves, there's a relief that can come when the person finally dies, or when that person moves to a facility, or where somehow you're getting to feel better as a caregiver is somehow connected to their getting worse or or even dying. Uh, that's just natural. How you deal with that or how you communicate that is, again, here, that's, I can't presume to tell you, but honesty is important, at the very least, with yourself. So please, I would really, feelings are feelings because we don't control them. So they're going to just come. And if you feel relief at the death of someone you've been caring for a long time, or whatever the circumstances, that's just you being honest. That's normal, especially if the person who is sick had been suffering a lot. It can be a real mercy for them, for to be out of pain, for them to have died. That could be exactly what they wanted too. Death isn't always the enemy. So there's all sorts of reasons why we might feel relief at the end of one's life. And that's just normal. May feel a little odd or hard to communicate, but it is normal. Just to note, we haven't found a way to talk a lot about gear, but there's often some gear waiting for you out there. The rehab world, PT, OT, the DME, durable medical equipment world, there's a lot of stuff out there, much of it not that helpful, a lot of it not very beautiful, and a lot of it very ripe for redesign. Any designers out there, you want to point yourself to sort of therapeutic ends. Um, you know, there's all sorts of, especially as more and more of us are living with frailty or disabilities or chronic illnesses that need to substitute for body parts like mine, like prosthetic components, etc. There's a lot that can be done. We humans are pretty innovative. But the point here is just don't forget that there may be some gear waiting for you. A bedside commode is one of the most handy things ever created, and cheap and easy to rent or buy. No one says, everyone's like, get that, no one wants that. But when you find yourself to the point where you can't get to the bathroom and back without having an accident, you will love your bedside commode. So a lot of this is contextual. Right now, bedside commode sounds very unpalatable. Someday I'm going to hug my bedside commode. So anyway, just as an example, hospital beds for rent can be real magic, especially if we're not able to move. So handling pressure sores and things like that. Lifts for a lot of us who are overweight or can't move at all. There are Hoyer lifts you can rent to pick you up and out of bed and move you. So there's all sorts of gear. When in doubt, ask PTs and OTs tend to know the gear out there very well, or just go to a shop. A good mom and pop DME shop can be really, really helpful. They can really know the ins and outs, and billing for this stuff can get really crazy. So you might want to lean on your social work if you have one on the team, because they need to get a prescription from the doctor for certain gear, and it has to be worded in a certain way. So I don't mean to make this out to be a cakewalk, but if you have a team, involving them and getting gear for you that might help at home. I think it's a generally underutilized piece of the puzzle. Okay, so a lot of us, medical expenses are the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy in this country by miles. Healthcare costs. So very sad statement, very true statement. So a lot of us, one way or another, find ourselves owing a hospital or a health system money. That's not uncommon. So my recommendation here is a lot of these financial the departments actually can be very helpful if you proactively reach out to them before they start talking about going to a collection agency or adding fines on top of your fees. I would push you to proactively reach out, explain your situation. A lot of these systems will cut the price for you if you explain your situation. I've been shocked at how friendly they've been at times, is simply proactively asking them. So if you got debt, I'd push you to reach out to the financial department of that health system or hospital and see if you can negotiate a payment plan or lower fees or both. It's often possible. Okay, guys, I think, yep. Okay, yeah. So that's just what we prepared today. Any questions popping up and you guys, or comments or stories? Let me cut that out. Anyone want to share any thoughts, feelings, anything, comments, other things that would be a great thing to mention here that we forgot about? Any little vagaries, little details, things that come up that haven't been, that don't often get mentioned in a typical clinical visit or educational thing like ours?
Well, while we're waiting for a hand or a question, we did get one over email that I can read out. This person says, I have a friend who wants to end her life due to living in pain with a terminal illness, but she lives in Arizona. What can someone do if they're interested in physician-assisted death, but their state doesn't have a program?
Right. Oh, so yeah, great case in point. It is, a lot of us will find that there are fates in this life worse than death. And a lot of us, another thing that we presuppose when we talk about is that death is nothing that no one wants. And I do that too. I sort of generally that's sort of baked into my comments. But in fact, I know very well that some people and many of us eventually welcome death and even seek it. And that's I don't believe that that's necessarily pathological or depressive. Since death is coming no matter what, the way we engage that truth is really our own business, and there's a wide range, if we're honest with ourselves, of how we might dance with death. That some of us, that means at some point welcoming it, asking for it, seeking it. So just that little setup to the question that this is important territory, and there's no shame if you find yourself harboring feelings like this. I also want to be careful here. There is a difference between the pathology of depression, a chemical depression that might point someone to take their life. That was true with my sister. So I don't want to romanticize death here either. Sometimes a hastened death, a suicide, is preventable, is avoidable, could have been, should have been, etc., with proper treatment and acknowledgement, etc. That's true. I believe that to be true. Sometimes there is pathology involved. Something is wrong. But not always. I think some of us just find ourselves done with this life, truly, really done, and with our eyes wide open, not fleeing life, just being done with it. Or life has become insufferable from pain or the fallout of illness. So lots to say about the subject. Try to find the right sort of tone here. But back to the question. So if I heard it correctly, the person in question does have a terminal illness, and that is key. So every of the 10, I think, states who have laws on the book for aid in dying, this is the language now. We don't say physician-assisted suicide because suicide connotes pathology for people and a wire we should uncross. So we now use the language of aid in dying or medical aid in dying or assisted dying. And this is a state law issue. And many states have a law in the book that if you qualify, you have 6 months or less to live from a disease process, and you meet certain criteria, you can get medications that will bring about your death, hasten your death. Arizona is not one of them. So more preamble for you. So Arizona, so when you're in a state where this is not possible, well, some folks, if they're really on their game, will move to a state that has, like Oregon or California, does have a aid in dying law in the books. These states, but be careful, a lot of these states have requirements that you have to live there for 2 years or something. So it's not as easy as just getting an apartment in Portland and off you go. So assuming moving isn't possible here, then you're left really with a couple of things. One is if this person is on hospice in particular, it can be really helpful to have them involved. It's always legal to pursue what's called palliative sedation. So palliative sedation is if symptoms, pain or otherwise or mental anguish, whatever, are out of control and meds aren't cutting it. You can pursue this thing called palliative sedation, where the hospice or the medical group in question, will provide you sedation, will put you to sleep. They won't end your life with medications, but they will put you to sleep so you can sleep through the rest of your life, potentially even, or be put to sleep for several days with respite sedation. sometimes then being woken up, coming out of sedation, sometimes your body has reset. You've been given several days of relief, and that can kind of reboot things. So this is a practice pound of sedation, which frankly is spottier than it should be. I think it's a very much above board procedure. It's clear how to do it well. A lot of people get ticklish around it. So as I push you to ask for palliative sedation, or to discuss that at least with the hospice team, assuming there is one involved, you might get a weird response, because they may need, for their own internal purposes, checks and balances, they may need to prove that you've failed every medication, tried every medication and none of it worked, et cetera. So they may put you through the ringer. They may say, we don't do that. So I just want to alert you there. If that's the case, well, talk to the medical director, get it with the doctor and say, well, then what can we do here? This person is suffering. What is the process by which we can invoke palliative sedation? Like, push them. This is a legal procedure. You're not asking anyone to do anything illegal or immoral from a bioethics standpoint. So palliative sedation, very much helpful to have a hospice involved to do that work well with the person. So that is an option, should be an option, may take a little effort. Another would be, I mean, there are people, I don't recommend this, there are people who are traveling to Switzerland and other states or countries in Europe that have laws on the book that allow them to hasten one's death. That's hard to recommend. I'm just mentioning it because they're out there. They cost a lot of money, and I don't know how the logistics work, but they're out there. There is also an organization, there was the Hemlock Society that many of us had heard about, that split up, I don't know how long ago, but became Compassion and Choices, which many of you will have heard of. It's an advocacy organization pushing states to develop aid in dying laws, compassionandchoices.org. That's the policy piece. And then there's this other piece called the Final Exit Network. And honestly, I don't know how these guys work, how they thread the laws in the state, but I can tell you nakedly that they exist. And if you're really wanting to pursue this, I can't advocate for them. I don't know how they work. I'm not associated with them, blah, 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 blah. But just in terms of the list of what's possible out there, you might reach out to the Final Exit Network and see what they can do with you, for you, together with you. So that's sort of a rundown of someone wanting to hasten their death in a state where that's not possible. But my favorite thing on that list would be to get very serious, to push, to get hospice involved and to push them around much more aggressive treatment on this person's pain, including potentially palliative sedation. Okay, I think that's a full answer.
Yeah, I think so too. Someone also, in relation to that question, asked about VSED, which for everybody listening is voluntary stopping eating and drinking. How do you feel about that one?
Sorry, that is absolutely on the list of possible things here. Sorry, thank you. So VSED, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. So that's exactly what it sounds like. Of course, any of us can, at any point of our lives, essentially starve ourselves to death. That is always your purview. I mean, unless you're institutionalized and under the care of somebody else, they may force feed you. So it can get tricky that way. But VSED, practically speaking, in the realm of terminal illness, is pretty much always possible. That puts the onus on the person to stop eating and drinking, which we have a lot of reflexes that tell us we want to do that. It can take a while. A body can live 3-4 weeks without food. The bigger point for VSED, and if you're really serious about hastening the death, is no fluid intake. We can't go for more than a week or so without any fluid intake, without any water intake or juice or any liquid. So that's the big one. So stopping eating and drinking, especially when you're feeling intense thirst, can be very hard to do. It's not a painless process, generally speaking. There is this thing that happens after a day or two of not eating where we get ketosis, and it can be kind of a euphoric feeling, it can be a dreamy feeling. So it's not necessarily a prescription for pain here. VSED is not necessarily all pain, but it's not easy. And sometimes, the dry mouth can be treated with sponges and chapstick and medications if there's any trouble breathing or if nausea sets in. So if anyone wants to pursue VSED, I don't do it lightly, and you're probably going to want help around you with meds and people checking in. And over time, as you get closer to death, you can expect to be in and out of delirium. And so that can be really hard. What does your onlookers do if you're out of it and reaching for water? You know, what to do there is this is not a prescribed pathway that to just sign up for and away you go. It's tricky this way. Always legal, you can always do it, but I'd really recommend you talk with someone around you to get help with meds. Hospice agencies should be able to support you with medications. They're probably not going to try to talk you in or out of VSED, but if you want to do that, you should be able to discuss with them above board what medications would be handy to have on hand, and maybe get a visit from the nurse over the course of your stopping eating and drinking to check in on you. It should be possible. Again, people get really ticklish around hastening death, and you might bump into a lot of barriers, but there is no legal barrier to VSED or no bioethical barrier to VSED. Okay, does that answer?
I think so, but the person who asked it, please feel free to check in about that. She followed up with, sounds like palliative sedation could help with VSED.
Yes, great point. Yes. So to get through the sort of wobbly course of VSED, well, being put to sleep with benzos like Valium or lorazepam, other kinds of benzos and other kinds of sedative, barbiturates, phenobarbital. So yeah, sleeping through that is a wonderful way to go. Wonderful way to go. I mean, I don't mean to be cavalier, but yeah, that should tend to your symptoms, allow you to sleep through the process, and even allow that sort of, like, one of the nice things about palliative sedation, you can kind of time the start of sedation, and it might take a minute to find the right dose, but there can be a real goodbye moment. You can orchestrate it. So my body's going to be here for another week or so, but my consciousness is not. So goodbye, I love you, and off you go. There can be closure in that. So yes, palliative sedation is a great way is a sound way, I should say, to manage the VSED process.
Okay, great. One of the next questions is about the organ donation section, and it says, what is next of kin's role in executing organ donation after a death?
Next of kin's role, okay, so if you're at home, remember at home, if the death happened at home, you're pretty much, by definition, beyond the pale for a solid organ transplant. So there's no rush at that point. If you see dying is coming within hours or days, as a caregiver, as a next of kin, as a family member, if this should have been prearranged with a doctor somewhere or the hospice. Like if you want to try to get that person to a facility for his or her final breaths, that can be hard to orchestrate, but possible. So if you can time the death a little bit, very rare, but if you can, and if this is well discussed and you've proactively reached out to a physician and wanted to make this possible, even to the hospital system, so that to get you right into the ER, et cetera. That takes a lot of orchestrating. I've never met anyone who's done that, proactively set it up, try to die at home, be at home as long as you can, and then time a trip to the hospital for the death. I suppose it's mathematically possible, but that's asking a lot. So otherwise, if you're at home, then it's more like settling into, okay, well, this is an emergency. If they're on hospice, just talking to the hospice guys. They should be able to help. So at that point, cornea transplants are possible. Or if you've arranged the wheeled body program, you as next of kin may be the one to make that phone call to the pathology department and say, hey, we filled out the paperwork for the wheeled body program and the death has happened. Sometimes it may be that they'll come fetch the body, but more than likely you'll still need to go through the funeral and mortuary as an intermediary. But as a next of kin, you may at least try calling that program soon after the death and seeing if they have some way to facilitate getting the body to them. And of course, that could have been done proactively before the death, so you're not asked to think about all these things in the throes of grief. So to answer your question, as next of kin, your job is to communicate either to the hospice agency if they're on hospice, they will have mechanisms for these things, generally speaking. Or if a person doesn't have hospice, then reaching out to the wheeled body program is important. And besides that, if you're at home, there's not much more you can do. That's pretty much all your options. If you're in a hospital setting and the death is happening, well, if you're on your and your next kin and you're on your toes, if we know death's coming in the next hour, you can proactively make sure to talk to the nurse, say, hey, my loved one here is an organ donor. We want to make sure that the system is in place. They should have been reaching out to you. That should come up. The clinician should bring that up in a hospital setting if death is anticipated. But sometimes it just doesn't happen. And you as next of kin, if you're in that mode, if you're in an advocacy mode, well, you might want to proactively push that and simply asking the nurse to reach out to the organ donation team. Usually there'll be a team of people who will come to the bedside and work it out with you. So there's the list of things you might need to think about as next of kin. But most of that has to have been done before the death. Once the death has happened, at that point, just settle on in. There's not much more to be done except for the willed body program outlet.
Okay, we have someone who wants to ask a question. One sec, I will unmute you. You may have to unmute yourself on the other end. Oh, there you are.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lily.
Hello.
Hi. My mom is 87 and she's in assisted living and she has congestive heart failure, and one kidney. And she recently broke her hip and she was for a bunch of months in a facility, rehab facility for that. She's doing some physical therapy, but probably not as much as she should be to, help keep her lungs clear. She's on and off of Lasix. And I'm sorry, I'm nervous.
Take your time.
Yeah, I'm up in Maine. She's in the seacoast, New Hampshire. I have two sisters that live near her. And they're sort of the ones who make the decision about what happens towards the end. So I mean, I guess there are a few questions. One that I keep thinking about is like, just I want her to be with family when she goes, and I don't know how we're gonna know when that's coming. One nurse practitioner told me that it's not an easy way to go. So I wanna, I'd love for her to come up and be with me. And also the other part of the question is I feel like it doesn't seem to, I called, when she was in the hospital to find out, sort of what the process is for palliative care. And it just, I didn't feel like I got a clear answer. I guess anyway, I guess maybe we'll answer the first part of the question first is like, is there any way to know when the end is coming? I don't know.
Okay, let's see if we can take one bit at a time here, Lily. First of all, thank you for putting it all out there with us. Nothing easy here. So let's see. One question. Let's take it a little inch at a time. So in terms of knowing when the end is coming, trying to time it, prognosis.
Yep.
We can get in the ballpark. It's very hard to be specific. We, in this case, doctors and medical people are often wrong. They often too generous in general, but in all directions, we're often wrong. We underestimate or overestimate. So, but at least asking the clinical team who's caring for her if they have a sense, and that can be helpful. Again, it's often wrong, but it's a data point. So.
Sure.
I would encourage you to ask very explicitly about prognosis, and that you really that you as a family want to make sure to get people around and involved and to the degree possible. And there's some, you just need to have a good sense of ballpark timing if they have any sense. Some doctors you'll have to push them really hard to get them to say sometimes. But anyway, that's one point, is just ask the clinical team for prognosis. Have you done that yet, Lily? Has that happened?
No, I mean, so does that mean I ask her primary care physician, or who do I ask? I mean, because there's a staff at the assisted living facility, but I don't know if she has like a primary caregiver there or.
Well, so I'd ask as many people who are involved, and then you get several data points. And
Okay.
so then that can just be, then you've got a little bit more data. So if her primary care doc has been involved, definitely ask him or her.
Okay.
If the primary care doc hasn't seen her in years, and but assuming the primary care doc is up to speed on what's going on with your mom, definitely
Yeah.
ask him or her. And I would ask at the facility, you can see that they're going to have someone who's has a nurse manager or someone in the facility, the assisted living place, who has some line of sight on the medical issues.
Okay.
So just because they are more proximal, they're living with your mom on some level, their insights may be very helpful. They may demur, they may say, well, you have to ask the doctor or whatever else. But I would ask whoever's in charge of her clinical care at the facility, I would ask them too. And then you've got at least a couple data points.
Okay.
So that's one piece. Um,
Yeah.
Generally speaking, from your own sense, so what you're looking for is changes over time. When you describe a woman in her 80s with congestive heart failure, one kidney, and a hip fracture. So she's got acute-ish and chronic issues at work on her body right now. Um, but especially in the setting of chronic illness like CHF, congestive heart failure, with only one kidney to navigate the fluid shifts in her body, that
Mm.
chronic illness, and usually a body dying from chronic illness, usually sort of slows down in a predictable way. So, you can a data point like if she is in the last couple of weeks, the change has been she's sleeping more and more, for example, or she's no
Okay.
longer talking to you, or she's no longer able to get out of bed. If those changes have happened, they're likely to continue. So whatever changes you've seen and you follow that arc of change, it's likely, if we're really at the advanced stages of illness here, it's likely to keep going. So if 2 weeks ago she was talking to you and now she's not talking at all, 1 week ago she was at least awake for half the day and now she's asleep for most of the day, that tells you that you're probably within weeks, maybe even days of life. Very hard to say. I'm talking in big generalities, but if you're watching the changes in her condition unfurl over these last couple of weeks, if you follow those changes out, then that can also give you a little bit of a ballpark sense of how much time she has. Am I making sense there, Lily? That's
No,
asking.
no, it makes complete sense. I think there's just this part of me inside that, wants the answer to be, okay, when you have CHF, it always goes, at a certain pace. And so you can kind of plan it, and I know that's not the case,
It's
but it's
not.
amazing to tell ourselves because we want things to be a certain way.
Of course, and you're wise to ask because sometimes there is a little bit more clarity. I'm talking generalities, but if I were at the bedside with you and her, we could look for certain things and kind of read the tea leaves of her body. So no, I think you're wise to ask, and you're wise to caveat your own question, knowing that it may not be possible. But certain things like renal failure, for example, does follow a predictable course. So if her urine output, is falling off, and if her urine is very dark, very concentrated, and she's not taking in fluids anymore,
Mhm.
you said she's on a diuretic, so she's got a reason to be pulling fluids out of her body to help her heart.
Yeah.
But if her kidney is no longer able to kind of manage that, and her one kidney starting to shut down, as evidenced by like waning urine output, and if it's going to practically nothing, well, if she's not making any urine, well, we know she's probably within 5 to 9 days of life.
Okay.
So there are certain things that you can read to get a little bit more certainty. So I'd keep asking. Uh,
Okay.
but a bigger point here on top of all this, Lily, would be to say, I wouldn't, when in doubt, like if you're wondering how to time a final goodbye, or something like that, and others in the family are friends, I wouldn't wait. Her body may follow a predictable course and have some time and be able to kind of read the tea leaves and know death is coming. Or if she's 87 and frail, she could go today. There's just no. So I wouldn't wait. If there's
Yeah.
certain visits that need to happen, I would up. I would, and you find yourself with more time, then that's just gravy. So when in doubt, do it now. And
Yeah.
then the last point, Lily, is I'm sorry if I'm talking over you.
No, no, no. Cool.
Well, the last point here is to just hold your own wanting to be there, or anybody's wanting to be at the bedside, hold that lightly. Even if you got lucky and could time and read her body and all the communications flowing and everything just works out that you logistically can make it to the bedside. One of the things that is just undeniably true is a lot of people need to be alone in their final moments to actually go. So you can do all this work trying to get everyone at the bedside and be there, want to be there for a final breath. And she may wait till you guys have all fallen asleep, until you guys finally went to get a meal to finally die. So no matter what you do, she may just need to be alone for her final breaths. That is a comment. Obviously, I don't know your mom at all or her situation, but that is a comment we see at the end of life so frequently. It just needs to be noted. So
Okay.
hold the goal of being there, physically there. Hold that goal lightly. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah, that's actually helpful.
Yeah.
Can I just have one more tiny little question?
Yeah.
That is it possible to have her home? I mean, if that can happen with morphine or whatever, like you were talking about with palliative sedation,
Mhm.
at the end, that's allowable for
Yep.
something? Okay, I'm done. Thank you for all that time.
It's a pleasure, Lily. These are really important questions. So thanks for bringing up. And I would say, yes, if the goal is to get home, someone's home, your sister's, anyone's home,
Yeah.
out of this living, and assuming she'd qualify, most certainly would, is get hospice involved, get home hospice involved. If they're involved, then getting morphine at the bedside at home and all that stuff becomes a lot easier. So I would really push you, if you guys are entertaining that idea of moving her to one of your homes for her final days, weeks, months, to do it with home hospice involved. Am
Okay.
I clear on that one?
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Thank
Okay.
you, BJ. Okay.
You, Lily,
Okay.
my best to your mom and your family.
Thank you.
Um, okay, any other questions, Sonia? Or
Yeah, we've got one other here. Esther, I'm going to unmute you. 1 second. Oh, where'd you go? Esther, you may have to unmute yourself on your end. There you are.
Oh, hey, sorry about that.
No problem.
Hello.
hi, Esther. We know
Hey,
you.
yeah, you do. Um, I'm just more of a talker than a typer, so I just thought.
Great.
Just also just want to reflect Lily about Lily's comment. Really listening there, and really amazing to hear her talking. So also thank you, Lily. And I just had a thought in all of that, which I want to offer respectfully. Just as you were talking about, who to kind of consult about maybe moving mom near end of life and how to do that. The thing that popped up for me was if it's possible to just, and again, I offer it respectfully, to maybe ask her what she would like. If she wants to be at home with family, all of those kind of things. Sometimes our needs can overshadow what the person that we're trying to care for needs. And I say that, I guess that comes from a little bit of personal experience, and having to kind of step back a little bit and go, oh, wait a minute here. Gee, I'm trying to do physio with my mom who's actually now dying, and maybe it's time to, that was my experience. So I just thought, yeah, the other person who maybe needs to weigh in on the whole kind of situation is Lily's mom.
Amen. Righto. Thank you for that reminder. Absolutely.
And then I just had one other little thing to throw in the mix, and then I will go, is just when we were talking about sometimes delirium at end of life,
Mhm.
I just was thinking that sometimes things we think might be delirium, or we look at and go, oh, they're delirious, maybe they're in pain, what's going on.
Mhm.
I would posit that sometimes those things are not necessarily delirium.
Mhm.
Maybe part of a sort of what I would call the big I am, the greater unknown, the something that happens, and can be indications of a person starting to transition
Mhm.
into their passing, or to be in that kind of labor. or
Mhm.
to be moving towards. Sometimes it can be weeks out, day,
Mhm.
sometimes it is delirium and there's something going on and things can be managed. But I think there is a difference.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes if we get to know, sometimes there are common threads. People talk about going on trips, going through windows, doors. Sometimes they start talking about people. And we think
Mhm.
there's nobody else in the room but me, but maybe there are. There are some common, and then sometimes not common. I just offer that in terms of the idea that sometimes we pass things off and go, oh, they're delirious, we better medicate them. And sometimes really it's communication that's really important and can help us to, as you say, kind of do some deep honesty, or I don't know, just help us
Yeah.
communicate with a person as they're going. So that was it.
Yeah, beautiful, Esther. You're getting to some really great details here. I mean, I'm so with you. Delirium is both undertreated and overtreated in my experience. And it is very difficult when someone sounds like they're not making sense. They may actually be making sense and speaking to something or about something that is essential for them. There may be a vital process happening.
Absolutely. And it may have to, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Just quickly, that may also have to be an important, something that's important for us to hear, to help them or to support them in a passing. There may be some really important message or thing they're trying to say, which is kind of helping them,
Mhm.
something they have to resolve, for example. So,
Righto.
sorry.
How to read these tea leaves is very, very tricky. This is where you'd love having experienced people by the bedside who can help you translate some of these things, or using, if you happen to be very intuitive and very connected to this person and have been with them at the bedside watching these changes unfold, you'll be much more likely to read them in a constructive way and to know when there's nuance playing out. It's very hard. I personally couldn't tell you if you see X, Y, and Z, then if you don't, then It's
No.
not that. But you're bringing up something very important, and this is where sort of a medicalized dying versus an other way of dying often diverge around the specifically delirium and whether that is a functional vital process playing out
Yeah.
or something pathological and should be treated. I will just say, for the purposes of communication here, my own experience as a provider, as a clinician at the bedside, I use a combination of sort of my just knowing the person, hopefully by then, so I can kind of read where they are and
Yeah.
knowing the situation. And if my sense is whatever they're going through may not make any sense to me, or I may not be able to track it, but if they seem to be embodying that state vehemently, and it doesn't seem to be pure anguish or pure chaos. This is a judgment call, but invariably, that if I see someone who's pleasantly confused, or it seems like they're engaged something that's important to them, then I usually don't shut that down. Usually, that's a call to stay put with the person, listen, and be with them, like you're saying. However, I see just chaos and agitation and anguish, this unrelenting. It doesn't seem to have an object that I can tell. I may be personally more apt to medicate that person into a calmer state. Invariably a judgment call, and this is why you want people around who have been around this, have seen these things before to translate. Because it can be really like, yes, they may be conveying something that seems essential, but I've also seen some beautiful, kind people in the throes of terminal delirium say some pretty horrible things that don't seem connected to anything, and then they're just seared into the mind of loved ones watching, and that's a really hard sell. So boy, it's tricky, but you're really bringing up some interesting points here, Esther, for us to not reflexively just move to quiet someone down, because oftentimes, to your earlier point, that's us treating ourselves. Like, we're uncomfortable watching this person be confused, and so we medicate them for our purposes. So anyway, you're calling forth a lot of really, really important stuff here, and a lot of judgment calls that have to happen in real time at the bedside.
Sure. And maybe suffering, as you sort of say, that some of the signalers around extreme suffering are cues there a little bit.
Yeah. And especially if I've talked to that person, I've known them, if I knew when they were more cogent that their suffering was meaningful to them, that some folks will tell you explicitly, like, that friction is helpful. They're burning off something. And
Mhm.
if I know that about the person because I knew them when they were more compos mentis in a way that we could appreciate, well, then that's a really important data point, and I'm much less likely to medicate them through that. So anyway, lots of variables in the mix, and I realize we're over time, so we got to run. But as ever, Esther, you deepen the conversation beautifully. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for these.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. All right. Well, Sonia, any last comments, or shall we hit
I
the road?
think we got all of them. Thanks everyone again for being here. Appreciate it. Hope everyone has a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you guys. Till next time.